Hello and welcome back to Principles of Micro with James Bland. Today we're going to be talking about positive externalities in markets. Just as a quick recap, remember that in all of the settings we've had up to this point, we've just been considering interactions that just involve a buyer and a seller. And buyers, we know that as trade happens, buyers send money to the seller sends the good to the buyer, and so the buyer gets what we're calling here their private value of obtaining the good minus the price, and the seller receives the price as a benefit, but incurs their marginal cost, right? Or their, in this situation, we think about this as a private marginal cost, okay? But now if we've got a positive externality, we've got a third party here who, if the trade goes through, is happy, okay? So we could think about this, some examples of this I mentioned in one of my previous videos, flu shots. You could also think about fireworks, right? If I let off a firework, you get to see it, even if you didn't pay for it. And there's really nothing I can do to stop you from getting that benefit. Other examples of positive externalities are things like fire protection. Okay, so suppose you're living in an apartment building, and your neighbor does a very good job at looking after their kitchen, making sure the place doesn't burn down. That makes your apartment safer. Okay, so that's a benefit that you enjoy, but you neither paid for nor supplied the fire protection for that apartment. You could also think about in a neighborhood that isn't an apartment. You could think about yard maintenance. In the sense that if you plant some trees in your yard, that's nice for you, but your neighbors also get to look at those trees and maybe enjoy the shade and having a more tree area that they're living in. Okay, so let's put this kind of situation into a market. Okay, so we're going to start out, as usual, with our basic Chapter 4 market, where we've got a supply curve here, and here we're going to assume that the supply curve is also the social cost curve, right? So we're going to assume there are no negative externalities, which is different to what we had in my previous lecture. But now we have a demand curve down here, which is equal to private value, but it's not equal to the social value. So let's add an externality in here. Okay, so here's our externality. And so not only when this good gets consumed, not only do the consumers who actually consume the good benefit from that, but someone else does as well. This is someone who didn't consume that good directly, right? So I got a flu shot this year. You're less likely to get the flu. Well, while I was teaching you in person, at least anyway, you're welcome. You neither paid for nor consumed that flu shot yourself, but you benefited from my action. So this curve here that looks like a demand curve, and it is measuring some values, this is going to be our social value curve. Okay, so this is going to be this social value curve is going to be equal to private value plus external benefit. Okay, so the value that the consumer gets themselves, plus the benefit that everyone who's not the consumer or producer of that good gets when you consume that good. Okay, so we're going to have a think about what happens in the market when we just let the market do its thing. Well, if we just let the markets do its thing, then consumers are responding to prices just like they usually do, and so are producers. So we end up with this quantity being traded in equilibrium, and this price being traded in equilibrium. And the question now is, are we maximizing total surplus? Okay. To think about that, I'm going to divide up the graph into a few other areas and work out what bits of this graph are consumer and producer surplus at different quantities. You know, if we want to maximize total surplus, is the market doing this? Now remember in chapter 7, the answer to this question was yes. If the demand curve measures all of the benefits of trade, all the values from buying the item that society gets, right? If all values are private and all costs are private, then the market equilibrium is efficient, right? It produces the right quantity and allocates that quantity to the right people, and it produces that quantity efficiently. Okay, but in this situation, spoilers, it's not. Okay, so I'm going to start by labeling some areas here. Anything that could be part of surplus is going to get another letter. Okay, so we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Okay, so let's see if I can zoom out a little bit here so I can start, draw a bit of a table over to the right. Okay, goodbye, previous diagram. There we go, that's good. Okay, so at Q star, okay, so at Q star, we've got consumer surplus, which is going to be the area between, so remember this is the private benefit to consumers, it's going to be the area between the demand curve, sorry not Q star, I haven't labeled that yet, at the equilibrium quantity, the consumer surplus is going to be the area between the price consumers pay, which is the equilibrium price, and the demand curve, right? So that's this triangle here. So that's areas B and C. Okay, well, what about producers in this situation? I've got producer surplus. And well, producers are selling the item at the equilibrium price, and their marginal costs are captured by the supply curve. And so their surplus is going to be equal to D. Okay, but we're not counting all of the benefits just yet, because there are these third parties out there who are going to benefit from these trades, right? If we think about this as the market for flu shots, in a kind of situation where no one has any access to health insurance and you just go out and buy a flu shot, these are the benefits that people who just get the flu shots get from just getting their own flu shot, okay? Even if I get my own flu shot, I also benefit from you getting a flu shot, and you benefit from me getting my flu shot. So there are a whole lot of benefits out there of these flu shots other than just the private benefits from getting it yourself. Okay, so over here I'm going to have another column of this table called external benefit. If we remember, the difference between the height of the demand curve and the social cost curve is this external benefit here. And so, well, how much of what's traded generates external benefit? Well, it's going to have to be to the left of the equilibrium quantity because, well, anything to the right isn't traded. It's going to be the difference between the social value curve and the demand curve, right? So this, here's the social value curve, and here is the demand curve. And so the external benefit in this situation is, A plus E. Right, so the total here is going to be A, B, C, D, and E. But now we need to ask, well, what happens if we increase quantity a little bit, right? So the market isn't going to do this by itself, but if we increased quantity a little bit, right? If we increased quantity above the equilibrium quantity, what are we doing? Well, the market wouldn't want to do this on its own because to the right of the equilibrium quantity, private costs are greater than private values, okay? But social values, right, the total value to society of this trade, right, that if we add up the benefit that the individual who gets the flu shot gets plus the benefit that everyone else gets because this person has the flu shot, then that benefit is greater than the cost to society of generating it. Okay, so I think must be my area G in there. So in this situation, let's work out what happens if we, so obviously here, if we increase along here, at least up to this point here, which I'm going to call Q star, total surplus is increasing. Okay. Now if you think about that, we have benefits that are greater than costs, but we have private benefits that are lower than costs. Okay, so let's see what consumer producer surplus are if we increase quantity to this Q star that I've labeled here. Okay, so consumer surplus now is going to be the area between the demand curve and for whatever reason, we want to see if we can impose this price here, and we'll get this price here. We'll see how we can impose that in a later class, okay? But suppose that the government was able to force the market to trade at this price, okay? In which case, that quantity would be traded, okay? Now, if we have that price, if we get that quantity, then consumer surplus plus the external benefit is going to be this area here, right? So the external benefit is going to be the area between, I mean, if we just think about this as total surplus, it's going to be the area between the social value curve and the social cost curve, which is going to be this area here, which is obviously bigger than the area we had before. Okay, so if we increased quantity by this much, we get a total of basically everything here except H, right? So A, B, C, D, E, which we had before, but now we also get F and G. Okay, so the results we're getting here is the market equilibrium, and this was true with negative externalities as well, is not efficient, and the optimal quantity is greater than the equilibrium quantity. This was the other way around for a negative externality. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm James Bland, and I'll see you later.